Hi everyone, good afternoon, good evening. My name's Emily Benn and I'm the Programme Director here for Big Tent. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our session on A Home for All in partnership with Crisis. We're delighted to have Crisis again involved with the Big Tent. In the last physical festival last year, they ran a brilliant session in the housing tent, so we really are very grateful for their time and expertise given the importance of the issue, particularly in the time that we're living in. As you may have seen on the screen before, just a couple of housekeeping notes before we start. The session is being recorded and will be available to view for members of the Big Tent on the Big Tent website and maybe used for promotional purposes. If you'd like to rewatch and all the other sessions that we've done, please join as a friend of the Big Tent, which will give you access to that and a load of other exclusive stuff. Details on the website, and we also of course have student memberships and student friend memberships. Thank you very much to our partners today, Finn Partners and to COVID-19 Check. I'm going to shortly hand over to Hannah from Crisis to start introducing and running things, but before I do, please throughout the session today put thoughts, put questions on the chat, because after some presentations, a video and some discussion, obviously as ever in the Big Tent, as many people to get their views across to ask questions. So I'll be bringing you in, those of you who indicate that you'd like to later on this afternoon to ask some questions and to have a dialogue. Please stay muted before that, and when you do want to ask a question, just unmute yourself and then mute yourself again. The event will last an hour, and after the formal session, the recording will stop and you can hang around and talk to each other as is normal at the end of our events. And if my internet dies, then one of my colleagues will pop in, and I haven't just regenerated, and as someone else, it will be someone else helping me. Thanks very much. So as I said, really delighted to introduce Hannah, who is Head of Policy and Campaigns at Crisis, who's going to talk and introduce some really fabulous speakers for something that is just so important. So thank you very much, and Hannah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Emily. We're really thrilled to join up with the Big Tent Festival this afternoon, so thank you so much for inviting us. Obviously, what we're here to discuss today is how the work of the government over the past few months could mark the beginning of an end to homelessness in this country. So in terms of today's session, I'm going to kick off with an overview of the government's response to coronavirus for people facing homelessness. We're then also joined by Charlie Atkinson. So Charlie is ordinarily the manager of our Crisis Cafe in London, but for the past few months, she's been working as a St Mungo's volunteer in the hotels that have actually been accommodating people who've been sleeping rough. We're also incredibly fortunate to be joined by Francesca. So Francesca is one of our Crisis ambassadors, and she's going to talk to us in a bit more detail about her personal experience of homelessness. And I know that Francesca was having a few difficulties connecting, so I really hope that by the time we get to her slot, that we're able to hear from her. So for Francesca, she experienced homelessness after having a career as an HR professional and as a carer. And importantly, what Francesca's going to describe and talk to us about today is about what more could have been done to prevent her homelessness. So if any of that chimes with you, please do sort of make notes, and we'll be coming to kind of questions towards the end of the session. Finally, we have Ruth Jacob, who is joining us from the Policy and Campaigns team at Crisis. So Ruth is going to be wrapping up the session before we hand over to the Q&A, and she's going to be talking in a bit more detail about the immediate next steps that we believe are needed to build on the government's work to prevent and end homelessness for good. So before I sort of outline the government's response, one of the things that we wanted to do with you was to ask how many people on this call believe that homelessness can be ended. And I think, and Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, the way that we're going to do that is just ask people to raise their hands, unless there is a more technical way of doing that.
If everyone could put their hands up, I'm going to do a quick count. So who thinks we can? Got it. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Emily, I don't know whether you want to give us a shout at this side in terms of how many people we have, in sort of maybe a rough proportion.
It was about 60 to 70% said yes, we can end it.
Okay, brilliant. And actually, based on the sort of research that we do and sort of public attitudes testing, that's probably slightly higher than the rest of the population. So that's a good start, and we'll see where we get to by the end of the session. So over the past couple of months, we've seen a monumental effort from national government to help shield and cushion citizens from the economic impacts of coronavirus. And in the homelessness sector, we've seen a parallel effort, both with regards to preventing homelessness, as well as protecting people who are already homeless. So for people who are experiencing homelessness, and that I should say includes people who are sleeping rough on our streets, they're amongst those who are the most exposed to the coronavirus, not only because they don't have the accommodation where they can self-isolate and follow public health guidance, but also because you're much more likely to have a pre-existing health condition, particularly a respiratory health condition. And that means that if you contract the virus, it could be much more serious. So in terms of the government's response, within a matter of weeks of lockdown, we saw broader measures taken by the government to help prevent people from losing their homes as a result of the pandemic. So this included a ban on evictions, and that's now actually been extended until the end of August. So originally when the government brought in that measure, they said that no one could be evicted until the end of June. That's now been extended. And alongside that measure, the Home Office has also banned evictions from asylum accommodation as well, which was one of the things that we were calling for. The government have also really importantly reinvested £1 billion in housing benefit so that it covers the bottom third of market rents for a 12-month period. And just to provide a bit of context on this, our research prior to coronavirus showed that in the majority of the country, rates were falling well below average rents, and in high pressure areas such as London, but also other big cities, housing benefit was actually only covering around 1 to 2% of properties in an area. So what that meant was that for significant numbers of people who were claiming housing benefit, they were facing the prospect of making up huge shortfalls. So that investment from government is very, very welcome. Also, what's happened, and again, within a few weeks of lockdown, the government launched the Everyone In initiative and instructed local authorities to provide everyone who was sleeping rough, as well as people who are living in unsuitable homelessness accommodations. So by that, I'm talking about kind of night shelters where people weren't able to self-isolate. And the government has instructed local councils to make sure that those people are provided with self-contained accommodation so that they can follow the government's wider public health instruction with regards to self-isolating. Importantly, this accommodation was provided to people on the basis of need. So that was regardless of whether or not they had a statutory entitlement to it or what their immigration status was. And this is the reason why we've been able to help so many more people who are sleeping rough during this period in a way that normally wouldn't even be imaginable for us. So in terms of the impact that intervention's had, within the space of about a month, almost 15,000 people, in fact, were found temporary accommodation. And actually, this has mostly been in hotels. And I know that's what Charlie's actually going to go on to talk about in a bit more detail. And actually, just looking at people in this call, and some people, some familiar faces, I know that there will be lots of you who have been involved in that work and will have a lot more kind of first-hand experience of that than me. There's absolutely no doubt that this action will have saved lives. And whilst hotel accommodation can in no way be described as an end to somebody's homelessness, what this has done is provide us with an incredibly important springboard from which we can begin to help move people into a home of their own and end their homelessness for good. Right now, however, though, people in those hotels are facing a cliff edge. So the majority of those hotel contracts are due to come to an end within the next 2 to 4 weeks. When that initiative was first launched from the government, what they did was provide a dedicated £3.2 million worth of funding to local authorities to help secure that accommodation. That funding has now run out. Those contracts are coming to an end imminently. And just to put in terms of that funding, those figures into context, the Welsh Government, for the same time period, provided local authorities there with £10 million to do exactly the same job, but for far fewer people. So they've accommodated 800 people in Wales. Local authorities are looking at accommodating 15,000 people. So we do have huge gaps in terms of funding, and that's something that urgently needs addressing. So right now, as I mentioned, we're at a bit of a crossroads with all of this, and we have some really important decisions to make as a society. So do we seize on the really impressive work that's been done by councils and the government to help get people off the streets and provide the homes that are needed to end homelessness for good? Or do we simply let people return to the streets? I think it's really important to say that so many of the people that have been accommodated in those hotels during this period, they're people that will have been sleeping rough for long periods of time. This might have been the first time that we've been able to positively engage with them through services, so it's absolutely vital that we don't lose that progress. Ruth and my team is going to talk to you in a bit more detail about what our campaigns calls are at Crisis, but just to flag that as an emergency provision, we're calling for temporary legal measures to ensure that everybody is able to access emergency accommodation, and that's regardless of their immigration status, for the period that we're having obviously a public health emergency, and that obviously councils have the funding from national government to deliver on this. So before I hand over to Charlie, I just want to play a short video from Tony Riley, who actually works in our frontline services at Crisis. So he's based up in Liverpool, and I hope that this video just provides you with a bit of a sense of how our services at Crisis are kind of adapting right now, and this will be reflective of homelessness charities right across the sector, who are working to ensure that people are able to access emergency accommodation. Now, it's not me that's going to play this video, but I think Georgie, you've got the technical end of this, but if there are any problems, just shout. Perfect, thank you.
Georgie will need the sound.
Running our temporary food bank, some of which you can see in the background here. It's a very different working week than it was during term time for the last few years. Monday is delivery day. We get a delivery of ready meals plus a whole bunch of fresh fruit and veg, put them into packages and work through the spreadsheet on who needs what, which is constantly changing. Put those packs together, send out some emails to raise some more drivers from other members of staff if needed, and then head out to those addresses. And when you get to the address, drop the bag at the door of wherever they're staying, and then retreat.
Oh, hi, Alex, it's Tony from Crisis. Hi, your food pack is at the front door. Thanks, Alex, bye-bye.
And then wait there to see them come to the door, grab the package, maybe give a quick wave, or maybe sometimes she's still speaking on the phone, say goodbye, and safely be on your way. So you've both kept yourself as safe and as isolated as possible.
Thanks, Alex.
I've had some lovely conversations. I feel like I've kind of grown to know a lot of the members that I'm working with. You become the one face that they're definitely seeing, albeit from a doorstep. I've had some other instances where I've just been to do a drop-off of a food package, and the members in a really poor state, suicidal state, and ended up being a very long conversation, and then engaging with that member for on and off over a few hours until getting to the right mental health team. And now I speak to that member, even though I'm not a member's lead worker, throughout the week, just to check in and then just to liaise with that member's lead worker, because that was a rough day for that member, and we kind of, we forced a bit of a bond, I think, at that moment. He's in a lot better place right now, and we have good banter now when I call him on the phone. He makes me laugh quite a bit, and so yeah, I was glad to be there for him on that day. He needed someone to talk to, not a food package that time.
Thank you for that, Georgie. So I hope that provides you with a bit more of a kind of flavour of what our frontline crisis services are doing. And also that it's not just the accommodation that's important during this period, it's the support that we're able to provide people in those hotel accommodation rooms as well. And one of the things that I should also mention is that in addition to obviously our services flexing and providing that support to people, we also recognise that none of this would be possible without a really, really strong response from the entire homelessness sector. So one of the things that we did at Crisis when the outbreak kind of first struck was to set up an emergency grants programme so that we were able to provide funding for homelessness organisations that might be struggling financially during this period. So that was one of the things that we felt was really, really important to make sure that there was a really robust response. So I'm probably going to shut up at this point, and I'm going to hand over to Charlie, who has been working in those hotels, so that she can tell us a bit more about the situation right now and also those experiences from the front line. So Charlie, I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks, Hannah. Hello, everybody. I hope you can all hear me okay. It's really nice to be talking to you all about this, not least because it's been, the past 4 months have been really, really intense. So 12-hour shifts inside hotels with either the ones I've been working in, 150 or 200 guests. And it gets very, very insular. So now to have the opportunity to speak to it, to an outward forum, is going to be really, really interesting. I know during my work life, collaboration is something people talk a lot about, but my very first day in the hotel, really being immersed in collaboration was something that I could see that was going to be really, really important. So different homelessness organisations, drug and alcohol outreach organisations, counselling organisations, the teams within the hotels themselves as well, like the Travelodge and Holiday Inn staff really kind of doing what they could to support people as well. And the sense and the feeling in the hotels is really different now. It was at the very beginning. At the very beginning, I have to say the fear was kind of palpable. We were worried about how we were going to get individuals to stay in their rooms and to stay isolated, to be able to protect everybody and so that we didn't get people congregating. And we didn't really have to do that, to be honest, because the fear of what was outside was keeping people in their rooms. And I think that kind of speaks to what Hannah was saying as well, is that lots of people that had never previously contacted services for help, whether that was local authorities or charities, did at this point, or people who've been offered support before and for many different reasons had said no, this time they said yes. So right from the very beginning, it was really, really complicated. To echo the video, what Tony said as well, kind of our work started with making sure people were kept alive, people were healthy, and that they were receiving enough food to be alive. That was really the MO of the first months. So 3 meals a day delivered to people's doors, an external catering company dropping the deliveries off, and then little extras of food and drink coming from the Crisis warehouse. And then through knocking at somebody's door 3 times a day and talking to them about food and what they liked and what they didn't and how they were, we began to build a really good picture and, really importantly, a solid relationship of trust with people. So then when it came 6 weeks ago to start getting people's histories and case histories ready for assessment and supporting people out of the hotels into stable accommodation, the trust we built up was really, really solid. We were all on a first name basis with the guests in our hotels, and I really think that went some way to having people trust us with their stories and their histories and the reason that they'd ended up either street homeless or statutorily homeless. And the last 6 weeks have been like, we've been riding our bike with the brakes on, and then all of a sudden, in the last month or so, the brakes have gone off and we started to go really, really fast. So when housing becomes available, trying to get people into it as quickly as possible. And one of the things that's been really tricky, I have to say, that has led us to be working a bit more quickly and has added to some of the anxieties, I think, is it's wonderful that there's been lots of news and conversation about homelessness in the hotels. But every time it says on the news or in a free newspaper that people that are living in the hotels are about to be turfed out onto the street again, we have at least a quarter of our hotel population come to reception, say, should I pack my bags? So that's been really difficult to deal with, to say, everybody here is working as hard as possible to make sure that doesn't happen. And I know it's just said on the news that the contracts are finishing, you're going to go back out on the streets, but we are doing everything we can. That's been really tough, actually, over the last 3 weeks. But yeah, we've been getting on with it. And now there is a sense of, there's much more of a sense of hope as people feel listened to. And, you know, even if it's very small barriers, like the access to technology, I know is something Crisis have worked really, really hard at. And something us volunteers have been doing a lot is helping people who've never had a smartphone to set up an email address and to show them how to use that smartphone. People were given smartphones, and then when it came to us supporting them to start a universal credit claim or to apply for a lost identity card, we all stopped short at people having no email address. And then we'd say, where's your phone? Oh, I got it, and then I didn't know how to use it, so it's just in my drawer. Right, okay, bring it down and we can help you learn how to use that mobile phone, which has been challenging. But you know, that access to technology, because you can't kind of go into the DWP, or you can't go into an office, or you can't go into a bank to open an account, supporting people to understand how to do those things online has been a lot of our work, actually, in between meal times. So after we've served the food, as volunteers, we'll sit with laptops and mobile phones and take drop-in appointments about those things, about helping people use the technology properly to access the things that they need. And that's actually been quite fun. Having seen some people move on in the last week into PRS or into supported accommodation, that has spread a real flutter of hope throughout the whole hotel. Word travels fast in places like hotels, so when somebody's moving out into their own place, that really does G up the sense of, I might not be back out on the street, this might happen for me, I might get my own place too. And the team at St Mungo's I can honestly say I've never seen a team work so hard. It's been a privilege to be part of their team. From 8 o'clock in the morning till, well, we're meant to finish at 8, but normally 8:30 at night, heads down, back-to-back appointments, working really, really hard to make sure people aren't sent back into street homelessness. And it feels possible. I mean, I'm in one of the hotels and it feels possible from in there. So I hope it feels possible from where you are too.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Before we move on, I just wanted to ask other people on the call whether anyone else had experience of working in any of the hotels, and whether that experience kind of chimed for them at all.
Hello, volunteer friends.
I'm seeing some nods there. And I guess for other people on the call, whether that was what you expected from sort of what, in terms of what's going on in hotels and the kind of work that's taking place on the ground, really. But Charlie, just a massive, massive thank you, because that was incredibly insightful. And I feel like I've learned so much. I mean, every time I talk to Charlie, I learn so much about what's going on the front line. But that was incredible. And I guess one of the questions I had before we hand over was, if you were asking the people that you're working with right now what they wanted to see as the next step, what they thought was the most important thing going forward, what do you think that they would tell you?
Not to get too romantic or too poetical about this, but I know that during lockdown, lots of us spent time thinking about the future and the things that we're not going to be able to do because of like holidays or career development or, you know, whatever. But what the people I work with at the hotels want is some indication that there is a future, that there will be a job market, that there will be an opportunity for drug and alcohol counselling, that the services they depend on will reopen. So I know that's a bit fluffy, isn't it? But that there is a sense of future, and that future goes beyond 4 walls and a roof and a set of house keys, that they're not dropped off. You know, they've gone from 4 walls of a hotel room to 4 walls of a bed sit and then see you later. That there is a sense of future coming for them, and the services that are going to offer that do exist and they will reopen.
Thank you, Charlie. I think it's just so important to bear all of that in mind when we're, you know, having those conversations about policy interventions and what government needs to do next. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Francesca, who is our crisis ambassador, and I can see that she's linked in there. So that, Francesca, are we all good to go from your end?
Yes, can you hear me as I'm coming?
Really well, thank you.
Right. Okay, well, thank you all very much. I'd like to thank Crisis especially for this opportunity to tell a part of my story. I think it's really important for me to share my personal experience of homelessness. I think very often there's a certain perception of a homeless person, a general stereotype of someone who is falling off societal norms. I mean, I had a professional career as an HR consultant for many years, and there was a sharp and sudden decline in my health, which affected my mobility. And I had to eventually give up work because of my health issues. This led to a sudden loss of income and my independence. It was as though a rug had been pulled from under my feet. All of a sudden, all the comforts I had associated with a working life were gone. My house was gone, my car was gone, etc., etc. I could no longer afford these basic necessities. After surfing with kind friends, I despaired, and a friend suggested I go to the local authority for help. That process was a nightmare with lots of bureaucracy and being looked down upon. There was no respect of dignity in the way and manner that I was handled. I eventually enlisted the help of Crisis through recommendation of a friend, and from then on, my caseworker Liam navigated me through the red tape of benefits and housing procedures. I can honestly say if it had not been for Crisis offering that much needed support to me, I don't know what I would have done or where I would be. I wanted to speak about my story because so often we live in a bubble, thinking we have financial security and life all planned out. Well, the recent pandemic is a testament to the fact that we cannot guarantee what life might throw our way. Attitudes and policies have got to change where homelessness is concerned because it can happen to anybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca. I'm so grateful that you were able to join us today to talk about your experience of homelessness, and I know I'll be speaking on behalf of everyone on this call. Francesca, before we move on, one of the things that I just wanted to ask about was whether there was something that could have happened differently for you that would have helped prevent your homelessness, whether that was kind of speaking to someone at the council, or an intervention that you think would have made a difference in terms of preventing you from becoming homeless.
Well, I think there's a lot. The bureaucracy is a lot to go through. I mean, you go through so many interviews and so forth, people you speak to, and I think that should be shortened because in all that time you're still homeless. I mean, if you're on the street or sofa surfing, you're still doing that while this process is going on. There's tons and tons of things you have to prove, you know, addresses where you've lived and so forth. It's just a ton of things. And I think if that was to cut down and your needs actually met, you know, immediately, that would help a lot. Because I'm sure a lot of people get fed up and probably can't find the, you know, the required stuff that's needed. And they just turn their backs on it because it is a lot to go through. I mean, it took me, I think, at least 3 weeks or a month before I was put into temporary accommodation. And that's a lot to go through if you're homeless. If you're homeless, it's an immediate need, you know. And so I don't know how they expect people to survive that couple of weeks while, you know, the paper trail is being worked out.
And Francesca, I can't tell you how often I hear that when I ask that question. It's always that kind of response around making sure that people are helped quickly and that we're kind of reducing a lot of the bureaucracy around this and kind of a lot of the hoops that we're expecting people to jump through. And I think it's one of the sort of big differences with the Everyone In initiative is that we haven't necessarily been requiring people to jump through all of those hoops and do all of that paperwork, and it kind of shows what can be achieved when we don't do that. One of the other things you mentioned, Francesca, was around perceptions of homelessness, and I thought that was a really, really important point, because for so many people they think it's rough sleeping, and actually that's a really small proportion of the total numbers of people who are experiencing homelessness. So I thought that was a really important point that you brought out there. I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of questions for Francesca, and I know Francesca will have lots more to say on this. I'm going to hand over to Ruth in our policy and campaigns team, who has been working on our policy response at Crisis to coronavirus. And Francesca, I'd be really interested to get your feedback on the sort of things that we're proposing in terms of next steps for government, but that will also be an opportunity to bring everyone else in the call in that point to see what's needed going forward. So Ruth, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Anna. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the policy kind of changes that we think are needed. I think hearing from Francesca and hearing from Charlie about what's happening in the hotels, it really shows what a critical moment we're at and why it's so important that we get this right and that we don't lose this opportunity. That we have this real opportunity. We've seen kind of action from the government through Everyone In, and we've seen organisations and people coming together in this extraordinary effort to bring thousands of people into emergency accommodation kind of immediately, without all of that bureaucracy that gets in the way and means that people have to kind of struggle to access that. And we really need to act now. And as Charlie was saying, there's that real fear that lockdown's easing, there's stories in the papers and about hotel contracts coming to an end, and there is a real risk that this progress could be lost, and that people will be forced to return to the streets. So we really want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And there's also a real risk that we'll start to see an increase in more people becoming homeless. Some of the research that we've done even up until now has shown that we're already seeing people becoming homeless from kind of situations where they were safer surfing or because they've lost work. And as the economic impact of coronavirus puts pressure on people that are already struggling with high rents and low wages, we're going to see more people becoming homeless for the first time. This isn't inevitable. The government have already taken some action, and this is the time when they can take bold action now to make sure that no one's forced to return to the streets, and that everyone can access the security of a safe and settled home. So today, Crisis launched our Home for All campaign, calling on the government to take the steps that are needed to actually make that a reality and bring about an end to homelessness in Britain. And it's really encouraging to hear that kind of the majority of people on this call think that that is a possibility. And I think we just need to really spread that and kind of convince people that that is the case. So we're asking the government to commit to a plan which will end homelessness for everyone, and that requires action, we think, in 4 key areas. Firstly, as Hannah said initially, we need to see that really immediate action to make sure that everyone who doesn't have anywhere safe to stay has access to emergency accommodation. People who are experiencing homelessness will continue to be especially vulnerable to coronavirus over the next coming months. So we're calling on the government to introduce a new duty for local authorities in England to provide emergency accommodation for everyone who's got nowhere safe to stay over the next year, regardless of whether they meet any of the legal tests for homelessness assistance, whether they are in priority need, have a local connection, and regardless of what their immigration status is. And we really need that to be backed up by funding for accommodation, but also for the support that people need as well. And that's really critical. Secondly, we need to see immediate action to remove some of the barriers that are making it harder for people who don't have recourse to public funds, who are moved from living here and moved here from another country, to lift those restrictions so that people can move out of homelessness. Currently, our immigration system stops many people who are living in the UK from receiving help to prevent or resolve their homelessness. This means that people can't get housing benefit or universal credit. So if something like an illness or an unexpected event like the pandemic, pretty sure no one was expecting this, harms their ability to pay their rent if they lose a job, or to buy food, pay bills, then they don't have any safety net to fall back on. So we really need to see the government lifting the no recourse to public funds restrictions so that people can access universal credit and homelessness assistance if they come into a situation where they need that. It's also really critical that the government are acting to ensure that housing is provided for everyone who needs it, with that appropriate support that's tailored to meet the individual's needs. And to achieve this, we're calling on the government to roll out Housing First across England. So Housing First is internationally proven to be just one of the most effective ways of supporting people who are kind of facing different challenges to get into a stable home and to be able to keep that home for good. It's based on the principle of providing secure housing with unconditional, tailored support for as long as that person needs it. We've seen this happen in Scotland and Wales. The governments have recognised the really important role that Housing First plays in ending homelessness. And we now need to see the same commitment in England. And whilst we know that not everyone will need Housing First, from the estimates that we've done through our research, we've shown that over 16,000 people probably do need a Housing First approach to end their homelessness. And currently, we're really far away from achieving that. So that's something that we really need to see the government get behind. And finally, we need to see long-term changes that actually prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place, by just ensuring that everyone actually can afford a home. And so all of the action to kind of get everyone that's experiencing homelessness now into a home is hugely important, but it's not enough by itself. We need to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place, and we can do that. And this will require the government to do a number of things. We need to see them build more social housing, and to make sure that people who are homeless are actually the ones who can get into social housing. We need to see the government commit to investing permanently into housing benefit so that it covers people's rent in the private rented sector. And more immediately, we need to see action to ensure that renters who are struggling because of the pandemic and have fallen behind on their rent because they've lost employment, they've had to become ill, had to care for relatives during this really difficult time, that they can't be evicted when the temporary suspension of evictions ends in August, and they can access additional support if they need it to help cover their rent in this time. So I hope that we've helped to show that ending homelessness is possible, and that the government, by taking these actions now, can build on the incredible progress that's already been made and help to make it a reality that everyone has a safe home. Yeah, and I would be really interested to kind of hear people's thoughts on those things, and if there's anything else as well that you think we really need to be tackling as well.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And I should say that as of this afternoon, I've got my hands on some draft emergency legislation that we'd had drafted at Crisis. So if anyone's interested in seeing that or is interested in backing our campaign on that one, it's obviously something that's of immediate need in the next couple of weeks if we're going to make a difference on this. But we have some very comprehensive clauses drafted, and I'm very happy to answer questions about those emergency legal provisions as well. Emily, I understand that you're going to chair the next part of the session, so we're going to have some questions from everyone on the call.
Yes, exactly. So thanks to everyone who's been putting some in the chat. I've got some pre-submitted questions that I'm going to ask first, if that's okay. First up is from a councillor, Lynn Riley, who asked, when is government going to be less prescriptive about how funding is spent? And are allocations to local government, do they come with too many stipulations? And does this stifle creative innovation and sustainable local solutions to homelessness? So I don't know if Hannah or Ruth, you have any thoughts on?
I'm happy to answer that question, Emily. So that's really useful feedback in terms of funding. So I think one of the things that we're always quite concerned about as a homelessness sector is, as ring fences for funding for homelessness services have been lifted, so there's a more of a kind of general pot for local authorities, that what that's meant over time is that we've seen a decline in the funding for homelessness services. But it's really useful to get that feedback from local authorities. And actually, one of the things that we've been considering as part of our recommendations is how we most usefully make that recommendation around funding and the mechanism to deliver it, and whether that's through a ring-fenced pot or a dedicated funding stream, or actually it's something wider that's going to local authorities. So that's certainly very, very useful feedback. And I think our priority is making sure that the funding that goes to local authorities is used around on homelessness services, because we know that there's so many other pressures on local councils right now. But that's a really, really useful and interesting point, and certainly something that we can feed into our policy making when it comes to the sort of mechanism around funding. I don't know if anyone else wanted to come in on that. No, maybe we're good.
Brilliant, thanks. One more before we get to some of them, which is why is it taking, this is from Martin Schoenfeld, what is taking the government so long to roll out Housing First nationally?
That's a question I ask all the time. I don't know why it's so slow. I think, you know, Ruth already touched upon this, but we have such extensive evidence from this country, but also internationally, that Housing First is the most effective intervention when it comes to ending homelessness, particularly for people with multiple and complex needs. So yes, I share that frustration. We have 3 pilot areas, and my understanding is that the reason for piloting it in this country rather than going for full rollout was so that we could learn more about the systems change that is needed in order to bring Housing First in. And I guess that's the only thing that I would say in terms of national rollout, is that with national rollout of Housing First, it does call us to sort of look at other policies that impact upon our ability to deliver that. So, for example, how people who are accessing a Housing First tenancy are navigating the welfare system. So do we have enough in the pot there for them to access a home of their own rather than shared accommodation, for example? So that's potentially a big barrier to us introducing Housing First. It also requires, as well as funding on the homelessness side, sufficient funding in drug and alcohol services. Because the whole premise of Housing First is that you not only help someone to move into a home, but you provide the robust support that's needed so that they can sustain that tenancy. So those are some of the potential obstacles, but from our perspective, we see no barrier as to why this shouldn't be rolled out immediately. And we have a political commitment from government there. I'd say if we're looking for quick and easy wins and things that could be done in response to the pandemic very quickly, given that we have the political will, the commitment there, and the pilots already, that this feels like a no-brainer to me.
Got it. If we could go for our first live question, I think Vicky Fox is going to ask. So if you don't mind just popping yourself on mute, off mute, and ask. Go ahead. Or
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Sorry, I'm dialing in because my laptop's on its last legs. So a couple of things. Do you think that service collaboration will continue post-COVID? And another one about a hotel. So is there a sense that those in hotels just now will have somewhere to go after this, or is the feeling that they'll return to the streets? And what sort of effects does this have on relationship building and engagement within those in the hotels?
Charlie, can I ask you to sort of kick off with that one? I think you're probably best placed.
Yeah, definitely. I can only speak for the hotel that I'm working in, but we are being released kind of certain numbers of private rental units or supported housing every day. So the triaging and the support work and A&R work we've been doing is allowing us to move quite quickly when units become available. The feeling amongst the team there from St Mungo's is that absolutely everything possible will be done to have people not go back onto the streets. And again, as guests in the hotel have started to see other guests be rehoused, the mood is generally hopeful. There will be, I think there's going to be a certain amount of people who have no recourse to public funds or very complicated refugee or asylum claims, that it might not be possible to move them quickly. But lots of things are being done to source alternative accommodation, so I've been told. And from the security guards to the hotel staff to the Mungos team to the volunteers, there's a real determination that we will not be putting anybody back to sleep outside. It doesn't seem like an option. And I know the people who are responsible for that are the people that are making decisions far above me. But if you're asking about the mood and the feeling, it is that by hook or by crook, nobody will be sent back out to sleep on the streets. The realities of that might be really different, but that's the feeling in the team I'm working in.
That's great, Charlie. Thank you.
All right. I know there's it's really hard to say anything for definite, but yeah, I know there's acquisitions being made left, right and centre, and the GLA are working on acquiring spaces for people, but the mood over the last 2 weeks in particular has been hopeful.
Hannah, can I just pick up on the no recourse to public funds point that Charlie was saying? Yeah, so I think that is a really big challenge, and from what Charlie's saying, what she's seen in the hotel that she's volunteering in, and also from kind of across the country, really, from what we're hearing from frontline services, is that that's such a big challenge for people. So, and it's people in a really wide variety of situations, but so you might be looking at like someone who's EA national, who's lived here for a long time, but they've lost employment in the crisis. Our service are really trying hard to get people back into employment, but obviously it's so difficult at the moment to do that, because the industries and places that people would normally have found work in just aren't open. So I think that's why we really need to see that lifting of some of those restrictions that mean people can get universal credit in this time, because that's going to be one of the biggest barriers that's stopping people from moving into the private rental. And yeah, it's such a critical thing, really, that should just for people to actually have access to that.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I think we got a question from.
Was the first bit of the question about collaboration?
Yeah. So do you think service collaboration will continue sort of post-COVID?
I really hope so. Like, I proper hope so. It's the way I've seen things move. The quickest and most successful is when organisations use the things that they are best at to their best ability, and to really look at the things that you specialise in and that you're good at, and to use them in the front. I think that's standard across most emergency response. You know, if you look at big emergency response organisations like the Red Cross, that's exactly what they do in times of real crisis. And it's been, oh God, I was going to say silver lining again then. It's been one of the real wins, I think, of the situation, is seeing lots of different organisations work together to provide people the best support. So I don't know the answer, but God, I really hope so.
Brilliant, thank you.
Brilliant, thanks so much. I think our very own George Freeman actually has a question. George.
Great, thanks, Emily. Thank you, Hannah and the team. A fantastic session, and for the work that you're doing. The reason I didn't put my hand up at the first question, can we solve the problem, i.e. get rid of all homelessness, is I just don't know how we would. So here's my question. How should we think about it, those of us in public policy, those of us with an interest? I imagine there's a sort of first phase of, if we're talking about complete eradication, first phase is provide appropriate housing for a first cohort. Then there's perhaps a demand cohort. We've really got to deal with people who shouldn't be, helping them not get into that situation in the first place. Mm-hmm. And then perhaps there's a really hard to reach group. And it's that hard to reach group I want to ask, for them, what's the biggest intervention really? Is it accepting that they need to have a home provided and designing the right space? Or is it tackling the root cause of their homelessness so that we can help them get back into mainstream housing?
That's another very good question, George. So I think I probably should have qualified this a little bit better when I talked about the idea of ending homelessness at the start of this conversation. So when we talk about homelessness ended, or ending everyone's homelessness, what we don't mean is that no one will ever not become homeless again. So when other countries talk about ending homelessness, they often talk about this concept of functional zero. And what that means is that sometimes people become homeless, but that it's rare, brief, and non-recurrent. So to take an example, Finland has ended homelessness, but they still have one very small hostel in Helsinki where if you do find yourself in that situation, you spend a week maybe whilst they then find you a home of their own. So they have a housing first or a housing led approach to ending homelessness. In terms of people who have kind of more high and complex needs, I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record on this one, but it absolutely is housing first. That's the answer there. And in terms of how that works, it is about making sure that first and foremost people are moved into a home of their own. I think there's a lot of misconceptions that for people with higher support needs, that for some reason they can't live in a home of their own and that they need to demonstrate in some way that they're housing ready. But we would never place those kind of requirements on anyone else. So why would we do it for that group of people? And so often is the case that it's actually a group of people who haven't had their needs met well by existing services. So what we shouldn't be doing is denying them access to housing. It calls us as the homelessness sector to really design the way that we're working to make sure that we're doing the things that enable them to access housing and the support they need. So it really is about kind of service redesign and making sure that we're providing people with housing. And it does feel like a difficult challenge, and I can understand why people feel that that's difficult, but it is like it's proven. And if we have something that's proven to work, then I think we have to go with that.
Brilliant, thanks. I don't know if anyone else wanted to jump in, but thanks, Hannah. Great. There's a question that I'm going to ask on behalf of Yvonne from the Oxford Homeless Movement, who asks, do you think that Dame Louise Case's remit covers those with no recourse to public funds? She fears not.
I'm happy to answer that. So very technically, obviously, Louise Casey was spearheading the Everyone In initiative. And when that initiative was first launched, it was very clear that people without recourse to public funds should be assisted. When it comes to the kind of broader issue, I guess, of no recourse to public funds, then that is a much bigger question for government. And Louise is she's within the MHCLG. This is a policy area that, you know, sits with the Home Office. It does have wider implications. So, you know, Louise has an incredible track record on ending homelessness, and, you know, I have a lot of confidence that she's going to do an amazing job in this area, but we do need a cross-government response to tackling homelessness, and the issue of no recourse to public funds is exactly why we need a cross-government approach. I don't know whether Ruth is our expert on no recourse to public funds, so Ruth, you can probably say something much more detailed and clever than me on that.
No, I would completely agree with that. I think it's certainly something that I can't see how it wouldn't be on her radar, because it's everything that we're hearing back from the hotels and from kind of frontline services is that this is a huge issue. In our research, you know, like we know this is affecting so many people. So I don't see how it could fail to be on her radar. But as Hannah said, we do really need, it's more than just from MHCLG. It needs a cross-government approach. It needs action from the Home Office and from DWP. Really, you know, we need to see, you know, from the top of government actually taking action on this, so that we don't have thousands of people living who can't access any kind of safety net.
Got it. Thanks so much. Just wanted to bring in Ian, who has some experience in volunteering, and just wanted to ask and say something. Ian.
Thanks, Emily. I'll be as brief as possible. I've only really got a comment. I work at Chelsea Physic Garden in communications. I was furloughed on the 1st of April, and by the end of the day, I was on the rota for St Mungo's locally. Thanks to Crisis for letting me know 2 weeks earlier. And it really kind of saved me, because I was able to repurpose by the end of the day of being furloughed, which was a horrible shock. I was there until I was unfurloughed 2 months later. I did about 7 weeks, mostly 3 days a week, 8:30 to 3, sometimes 3:15, 3:30. I had a few days off 1 week. I'm going back actually a week on Sunday, and then I've taken a Monday off in July. Surprisingly, actually, because I thought it was going to be over, and as has been said, like there's been a lot of uncertainty about when it's going to be over, and it really seeps through to the guests. Just say 2 quick things. It was marvelous, and it's a marvelous endeavour. And the collaboration, the collaboration was great, but it caused absolute chaos. The security teams were great eventually, but the security teams had to repurpose as to what they had to do. There were hubs as well as St. Mungo's. There are still laundry deliveries. We got pizza after lunch on Monday, every Monday, 60 pizzas, which we had to split because there was 130 rooms, and then run them upstairs while they were still warm to get them out. Everybody would take them. We got donuts, all sorts of mad times from different donut companies. And yeah, everything about the phones and all that is all true. It was a little bit too chaotic for me, I thought, and I thought rotating shift leaders, which is what we had, probably wasn't the right thing. And the second thing I'll say was I didn't put my hand up when the question was asked. For 2 reasons. I think mental health isn't being funded properly in this country, and it won't matter as long as that's the case. And secondly, I don't really trust this government. I can kind of understand why they rushed out the 6,000 people being rehoused during the biggest communications crisis they've ever had. But this was a public health crisis. This is nothing to do with homeless people. And I just don't believe that the government cares more about homeless people now than they did before now. And that's pretty much all I've got to say. Again, thanks Crisis for letting me know. And that's me.
Great. Well, some kind of thought-provoking stuff there about the politics of the situation. But that's what we're here for, and this is exactly the type of forum that you want people to talk about that kind of stuff. Given the time that we've got left, we really don't have much time. I mean, we could talk about this topic forever, but as we don't, Hannah and your colleagues, I wonder if we could just have some kind of closing thoughts. Maybe right at the end, ask the question again to see if whether Housing First will finally be rolled out, whether people are as optimistic or not. But I just wondered if you wouldn't mind just giving us some closing thoughts based on what we've discussed, and leaving us with the things that we really need to think about when we're thinking about this issue as we face the end of this pandemic, and then going back to whatever it is, the new normal afterwards. Oh, almost. There we go.
And you won't be able to get through a session without speaking and at some point being on mute. So that had to happen. Yeah, I guess final thoughts from me is that I guess just kind of to go back to what I was saying at the beginning, that we have a very important opportunity right now. We have never been in a situation where we've had so many people who are sleeping rough or in unsuitable emergency accommodation inside in a hotel, and we have to use that platform to end their homelessness for good. It would be a huge wasted opportunity if we didn't move beyond the Everyone In initiative and step up in terms of making sure that people had a legal right to housing, and that the funding was there to do it. I think I might mention this at the beginning, but there is a manifesto commitment in place from the Westminster government to end rough sleeping by 2024. If we lost the opportunity that we have right now, we would be going back on all of that progress. The government has already committed to doing this in the next 4 years. They'll be spending a lot more money in the long run if we lose the progress that's made right now. So it's the moral and it's the just thing to do. And there's absolutely no way that any of us, I'm sure, can imagine the idea of people being sort of forced to return back to the streets. But this is something that's doable and the political will is there. So I think this is the opportunity now more than ever.
Charlie?
Yeah, it's really interesting what Ian had to say about it being a public health crisis rather than a homelessness crisis. But maybe if homelessness and mental health support is reframed always as a public health crisis, not as a separate crisis from other elements of society, maybe always reframing homelessness as a public health crisis might be one of the ways that we can start to end it. And yeah, I hope that we can keep up the momentum, and it is the beginning of the end of homelessness. It feels like there's a real opportunity, and it would be devastating if that wasn't taken, especially by government and the people who do have the power to really make it happen. And thank you all for listening and for taking the time to hear. You know, starting and listening and learning new things is always one of the ways that you end a crisis. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Charlie. Ruth, I don't know if you had any last things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much to add on that really. But yeah, I think it's that real sense that this is a turning point. And I think from everything that Charlie said really, about how people are feeling in the hotels and how this is just, it's a real opportunity. It would just be wrong not to act on it.
Absolutely. Hannah, I don't know if you wanted to, I don't know if Francesca's still on, or if you wanted to ask the question again.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if Francesca's still on the call as well, to get some final thoughts from you, Francesca, if there was anything that sort of popped up whilst you were listening to the discussion.
Hello.
I can hear you.
Hello. Hi. Yeah. It's been really informative. Being on the journey myself, you know, it's given me a lot of foresight into what could be better. And let's just hope that, you know, forums like this will evoke that, and that it will become easier and better through, you know, policies and the government's attitude. So fingers crossed.
Thank you so much, Francesca. So I guess back to your point, Emily, we should probably ask the question again, having heard everything we've got to say about it and progress that's being made right now, and the sort of definition, I guess, of functional zero when we're talking about ending homelessness, whether or not people think that that is something that's possible. Probably put my own hand up here.
I certainly haven't changed my mind. Let's have a look. Keep your hands up, everyone. I'd say we definitely have a few more. We have definitely a few change of minds in the positive direction. So, which is no doubt thanks to the kind of detail and optimism you gave about the type of policy interventions that can make a difference. And hopefully people are cognizant of the opportunity that you have all displayed. So definitely a few more by the end of the session, definitely edging 70-ish. So, well, all that leaves me to do is to say thank you so much to Hannah, to Ruth, to Charlie, and to Francesca for talking to us today. It really is. It's been humbling to hear the work you're doing, your experiences, and from Big Tent perspective, just fantastic. Thank you for continuing our collaboration, and we look forward to it more in the future, and very much hope that all of us, when thinking about this topic, now do so with a much more detailed knowledge of the kind of policies and the kind of issues that really matter to the people who know it and who are working on it. Our next session at the Big Tent is next week. It's in partnership with Local Trust. It's looking at unleashing the power of local communities. We've touched on some of the issues about local innovation and homelessness and local funding. These are the kind of things we're going to be talking about unleashing local communities. As ever, please think about joining Big Tent as a friend so you can see these events, either as a student or not, and more. And we look forward to more discussions. But before I stop the recording and the speakers will leave, and if you want to stay, please do. Just thank you again so much to Finn, to COVID-19 Check for supporting us, but more importantly, thanks to Crisis, and good luck, and keep doing what you're doing. And we are very, very, very grateful to you. And as someone has just put here, amazing work. Let's make the change lasting. I couldn't think of a better way to end. So thank you very much, everyone. Bye.